Welcome back to our next section, which is entitled Active Shooter Response Training. Again, I am your facilitator, your trainer, your instruction designer, and just your leader in this situation to make sure that you have all the information that you need around active shooter response. And our main focus for this content is to make sure that you are prepared for any potential encounters that you may have, as well as just understanding the different threats and risks that may be present at your facility, at your site, on the premises, outside of the premises, or even nearby. And we want to make sure that you understand that it is essential for all employees to make sure they go through this training, but that you understand the training. It can be challenging. It can be a little terrifying, to be quite frank with you. But honestly, with our role and our commitment to safety, this model specifically will make sure that you understand, that you're able to apply it, and that you feel comfortable going out into your post assignment. And so what you will see here is that our training is going to focus on insight, awareness, education, just to make sure that you understand what to do if you hear something, you see something, or you are directly faced with something or faced with that specific threat, right? And what we see in this big blue box that we want to make it clear is that any client that Metro One has an agreement with or establishes a contract with or does business with, we're all on the same page. So they all agree, like we agree and we believe, that safety is a priority. So that's why this is a mandatory part of training, to make sure that you understand, in fact, that we want you to make it home every day, but also those that are in our presence that are requiring our assistance, we want to also make sure that they make it home as well. Okay. So the first section that we're going to cover is understanding and defining workplace violence. So earlier in the training, we talked a little bit about OSHA. So we just want to make sure that we are emphasizing and making sure that we understand the definition and exactly what workplace violence is. There is another module in Metro One Learning Academy, so within this portal, that is called Workplace Sensitivity. So if that is something you're interested in taking, we encourage you to take it. It is not required for everyone. It will be in the near future, but that will also be able to elaborate on workplace violence as well. But what we have here is simply a definition by OSHA. And OSHA stands for the Occupational Safety Hazard Association. And so what we find is that workplace violence is any act or threat of physical violence, harassment, intimidation, or other threatening, disruptive behaviors that occur at the work site. Okay, and so it's anything that is impacting or causing a distraction from our day-to-day activities that becomes a serious threat or the concern that someone may be in harm's way. And so what we find is that OSHA is what we consider a managing entity. So that is a large organization that says that we understand that at organizations and companies around the country, that because of your interaction, because of your accessibility, because of your location, there may be different risks that may happen based on your interaction with people. And so it's so important that we understand that. A lot of times when we hear of active shooter response, we hear of specific scenarios, but what we'll see here that OSHA elaborates, and they actually say that your level of threat or risk is increased because of, one, your profession, right? So you are a security officer, security guard. So naturally, your profession is probably a little more heightened than, someone in another field. And I could say, let's think of an example. Probably a little more heightened, not to say that they don't have concerns or threats, right? But when you are in a position of authority, then that automatically tends to draw attention to you, right? So being a security officer versus being a desk attendant could be a little different, right? Like you have a uniform. Some of your jackets will say security on the back of them. Some of our officers are armed in different locations. Some of them are not, but it just draws a different level of attention, okay? They say your interaction with the public. So simply saying your interaction with people, right? Your interaction, you talking with them, the risk of saying something that they don't agree with, or something that maybe someone misunderstood, or just that they are possibly under the influence of a substance. Therefore, sometimes it's just completely out of your control, right? So when we say mood altering substances, that's that's alcohol, prescribed drugs, illegal drugs, hallucinogens, any and all of that, right? And then also the time of the day. And I want to take a moment to sit there for a second, because it's so important that you all assess and understand the significant difference of shifts. And when I say that, you have first, second, and third shift for most of our sites, well, for majority of our sites, to be honest. But what we have to understand is that just because you work third shift does not mean that your shift is slower, that it's less work, that you don't have to document as much. If anything, your level of awareness is heightened, because it may appear to be slower, but that can also increase the level of risk. Naturally, most sites won't have as many employees as they do during the day, because administration has gone home. You're not going to have the activities with the vendors dropping off, supplies or food or things for the vending machines that usually happens during business hours. But it doesn't mean that activity is not still taking place. It doesn't mean that you still have to be aware and alert. So it's one thing that I always like to emphasize is that when you work third shift or even second shift, those are times where you have to be alert and aware and know your protocol, get to know people that work on your shift, get to know their names, what the uniforms within the facility of other employees look like, so that you can be aware and be able to identify if there's ever a concern. And the reason we say that is because there are 4 categories that OSHA identifies when it comes to workplace violence. And so these are all relevant in different areas and different sites around the country. And so just a friendly reminder, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, to please make sure that you're taking notes. You can pause this video at any time, and you will be able to replay this video as well. Okay? So there are 4 types of workplace violence that OSHA describes that is absolutely relevant to our field. And you'll see that they're each labeled type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. And so what I'll do is I will paraphrase the actual definition, and then I will also try to give you an example that will hopefully help you to recall and be able to, reference it later in the event that you have a concern. Hopefully you never do, but it's important that we're always prepared, because preparation is the most effective level of prevention as an officer. And so the first type that we have here is random act of violence towards an individual or group. So this is an example. Type 1 right here is an example of someone that has absolutely no connection to the harm that they've caused, meaning that they never worked there, they didn't know anyone there, there's literally no connection. For whatever reason, this individual decided today that they were going to show up and attempt or do what they decided to do. Okay, so literally absolutely random is type 1. Okay, type 2 is an individual or group is targeted based on their attachment to services rendered. Okay, so an example that we can provide, and it's a sad example, but it's a very realistic example that has happened, unfortunately, more than once within the country. And so what we find is that if there is a medical provider that is providing services that individuals do not agree with, there have been cases where that individual has shown up to that doctor, that nurse, their location, and we've had homicidal behavior. We've had murder take place because they did not agree with that doctor or that nurse facilitating those procedures. So they took matters into their own hands. It can also be, someone that I'll give an example from when I worked in healthcare. One of our units were for forensic patients. And so in healthcare, forensic patients are those that are incarcerated. So depending on what services are available at the jail or even at the prison for that matter. Sometimes there will be facilities that have contracts with them and they can come in and get the medical services they need, right? And so let's say that we have an inmate at our facility that has done something that has really caused a lot of harm, and maybe a family member hears about it and they decide to attempt to come to our facility and target either that individual or the entire facility because it is a service that we provide. Okay, I hope that made sense. So I'm going to kind of go back. Type 1 is literally a random act, and type 2 is simply saying that a person or group of people are targeted because they are attached to services. So it's because you work there. It's because you are the doctor that prescribed the medication. You are the therapist that confirmed X, Y, and Z. So it's your attachment. Okay. When we talk about security officers, it could simply be that you work there, that you're in the security field, that you have on the security jacket. Is your attachment to the service. Okay. Type 3 is the most common. So if you're taking notes, please remember that type 3 is the most common category when it comes to workplace violence in the United States. And type 3 is violence that is done by a current or former employee. So this is when you hear of, like on the news, you'll hear disgruntled behavior. An employee left because, they felt that they were terminated under the wrong circumstances. It wasn't fair and so forth. And so that is what that is saying. So unfortunately, we'll show some data later in this presentation where you will be able to see, what the journey of active shooter encounters and active shooter situations here in the U.S. And many of those have been current or former employees. Okay. And so what I want to emphasize with that is make sure that you know your site's protocol and procedures in regards to terminated employees. A lot of facilities will not permit that a terminated employee comes back on property. Some sites will say that they can return as long as they are being escorted. So just make sure you're familiar with that, because a lot of times if an employee has been terminated, their access has been removed and they have been advised that they are not permitted to come back on property. So you just want to make sure you understand what your facility requires so that you can make sure that you're in compliance, keeping yourself safe and others. And so then here we have the last one, which is type 4. And this says that the individual has a personal relationship. And so type 4 is, we see a lot of domestic violence in this section. So we see a personal relationship, so it can be a family member and it can be a relationship, but somehow they know each other outside of this setting, and it's some type of personal connection. So again, a lot of cases we see with type 4 are typically domestic violence, and it is not gender specific. It is just a relationship that has become violent, whether it is verbal, physical, emotional, financial, and the list goes on. Okay. So let's recap just to make sure we have it. Random acts, literally random person, random targets, right? Then we have type 2, individuals are targeted because of their attachment to services. Type 3, we have former or current employees. And type 4, we have the person has a personal relationship or a connection with that employee. Okay. Feel free to pause at any time to make sure you can take your notes and that you feel comfortable. And so here what we have is documentation. Later on in this module, if you haven't completed it already, we will talk about documentation and the specifics around it. But the most important thing to realize is that documentation can absolutely save lives. If you saw something or you had to talk to someone or someone brought something to your attention, you always want to document that. If it's something that raises red flags, not only do you want to document it, but you also want to verbally communicate that with your supervisor and also with your fellow officers and your colleagues. Many times during what I'm going to say shift change, meaning when one officer is leaving, another one is coming on, there should always be dialogue about what took place on your shift. And then that is a situation where you will share, we had an encounter in the east parking lot or in the North Tower building. This was brought to my attention. I did an incident report. I also called our immediate supervisor and made them aware, just to keep people in the loop, but it's also to keep individuals safe, right? And so you'll see here that it says regardless of your relationship or experience with an individual. So even if you have an amazing coworker or you see a particular employee that comes into this building all the time, every day for work, if you have concerns or someone brings something to your attention, you have to address it in real time. Unfortunately and fortunately, we can't just take someone's word. We can't assume. We can't just say, oh, they misunderstood. We have to take everything extremely seriously because anything could cause harm to someone's life, whether it's here at your site or elsewhere. So you want to make sure that we are absolutely being intentional, being mindful, and being committed to the job of communicating and documenting. Okay. And so here's where we have data. And after this, we'll take a brief break, but this is the data that we have pulled. So what we like to do is keep some of our statistics up to date within the previous year. So the way that FBI data and active shooter data works is that they always report the previous year. And so you'll see here is that the FBI identifies an active shooter situation is when an individual or a group of people have made a decision and are attempting or have caused some type of injury or their fatalities because of their behavior. Okay. And within 2021, there were a total of 61 shootings within the United States. And for some of us, I mean, that number one shooting is too many, right? But I know some of you may be thinking like, wow, it seemed like there were way more than that. Well, the situation is that when we look at some of our data here from 2017 to now, it is more because you can see how much it is increasing, right? So from 2020, we went from 40 shootings to 2021, we went to 61. And then we have a chart directly above it that also outlines specific days in the week that seem to be a common thread when we look at active shooter situations. And the reason why a lot of times this number is not higher than we think, again, 61 is too many. Please understand when I say that it's too many. But what happens is it's just basically by the definition of what the FBI has. So this may be a little different than a one-on-one situation and someone is shot in that situation or unfortunately have lost their life versus a mass shooting in a large area where someone is deliberately targeting a group of people. So that's the difference, but please take a moment to pause to kind of read the charts, explore it, because it is very important for you to be aware and just something to think about. And again, this is data that is summarizing the entire United States. Okay, so take a moment here. We'll come back and we'll continue to go through this presentation.